Hello there. Welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of their earliest crimes. Before we get to the crime, let's talk about the coloring. So I have selected a whole heap and handful of Copic markers to color with today, and I am going to be stamping this waffle flower succulent stamp. This is one of my favorites. I color it often, and every time I color it, I try to color it just a little differently. I will be adding some Neenah Solar White Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock to my Misty Stamp Positioner. I will stamp the succulent bunch with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink because it is an alcohol-friendly marker ink. Don't worry about the fact that the stamp is kind of crooked because I tipped it. When I am done coloring, I will go back over it with a darker black ink just to redefine those edges. I will also be using some colorless blender to fix the boo-boos where I go out of the line, as well as adding some highlights at the end of the coloring. So now that we've talked about the coloring, let's get into the crime. This week's episode of Crime and Coloring, we are talking about the state of Iowa. On December 28, 1846, Iowa became the 29th state in the Union when President James Polk signed Iowa's admission bill into law. According to an early pioneer, the state got its name when the Native Americans saw the land saying, "Iowa, Iowa, Iowa," which meant beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Interestingly enough, hogs outnumber people 4-1, so with 3 million people in the state, that means Iowa is home to around 12 million hogs. The Red Delicious apple originated at an orchard in Iowa. The town of Britt, Iowa is home to the National Hobo Convention as well as the Hobo Museum, which is the only museum that is dedicated itself to the hobo way of life. Iowa is also the home of the onion weeder murderer. Yeah, you heard me, onion weeder murderer. I gave it that name because it didn't have a fancy one and I liked it. Okay, William Hellwegner was born February 13, 1833 in Bavaria, Germany, and eventually immigrated to the United States. He lived in both Illinois and Iowa, and he married Catherine Schnantz sometime in the mid-1850s. I found both William and Catherine, and their children, but I couldn't find a specific marriage date. They went on to have at least 5 children. Some reports say there may have been a 6th. Otto, their oldest son, married Dorothea Klenau on the 31st of July, 1877. Dorothea, also called Dora, was born in Prussia about 1855. I didn't find any specific record of her immigration, and her marriage to Otto was the first record I could find of her, and that marriage took place in Rock Island, Illinois. We are kind of jumping back and forth across the Illinois and Iowa border today. Otto and Dora went on to have at least 3 children, George, Otto Jr., and Louise. A side note, one record named Otto's wife as Annie and the other Dorothea, and the family records and marriage record that I found named her as Dorothea. So I will call her Dora, which is also apparently what she was called. There wasn't a lot about either family's lifestyle, but eventually William, Otto, and their families became onion farmers in Iowa. However, in September of 1881, the typical peace and quiet of Davenport, Iowa was shattered by the news of a murder. On a farm 11 miles north of the city, on Happy Hollow Road, a young woman named Dora Hellwegner was shot and killed. Since Otto, her husband, was out playing pinochle that night, the suspicion soon centered on the only person known to have been at her farmhouse at the time, her elderly father-in-law, William, a Bavarian immigrant who hated her for her wild behavior. Early the next morning, William was said to have shared the news of his daughter-in-law's death before anybody else even knew she was dead. And soon, a chain of circumstantial evidence wrapped itself around William, who made no real effort to explain or defend himself. Justice was swift, and his trial a few months later, lasted just for days. I could not find even a newspaper report of the trial proceedings. So it's kind of odd. However, the prosecution established that he had visited the home of his daughter-in-law on the evening of the murder and that he had been in a rage over a dispute that had arisen between them concerning the loss of some milk. This evidence included the testimony of William's 17-year-old daughter, who said that her father was drunk on the day of the murder and was railing against Dora, calling her, quote, the low-livedest thing around. William's defense attorney repeatedly pointed to the lack of direct evidence, the lack of witnesses to prove the state's theory, but to no avail. The trial resulted in a conviction and a death sentence. A higher court examined the proceedings for flaws, found none, and rendered its approval. There was a newspaper article that stated William's wife Catherine and their children came to visit him in jail. Only Catherine and the older children knew the fate of William, that he was sentenced to be hanged. The article noted that it was an emotional visit, both with hugs and tears. So after his sentencing, a man named Charles Edward Russell appeared on the scene. At the time, Charles was a reporter for Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and was well on his way to becoming one of the most famous reporters of his day. Charles was a native of Davenport, and he decided to dig into the case. He went to the jail where William was being housed and tried to interview the old man, looking for an excuse, some break in the case, something to explain some nagging doubts about the evidence. Charles described he wrote a memoir. Okay, let's back up there. Charles wrote a memoir in 1914, and the name of it is These Shifting Scenes, and he talks about the interview he had with this Bavarian man, and he describes it as nothing but aggravation. And I'm going to read a little bit of this interview. So Charles asks William, where were you the night when your daughter-in-law was killed? And William's response was, who, me? Yes, you. Where were you? Oh, I was in the house. Well, did you see her get killed? Who, me? No, I didn't see her get killed. Did you hear her cry out? Who, me? Yes, you. Did you hear her cry out? No, I didn't hear nothing. Did she go to bed as usual that night? Oh, what? Yeah, who? Yes, I guess so. She go to bed all right. Did you hear her get up in the night? Did you hear anybody come into the house? Did you hear any talking or fighting? Who, me? Yes, you. No, I didn't hear anything. Well, you knew that she went to bed that night, and she wasn't there the next morning, and she never came back. Didn't you think that was strange? Didn't think that was strange. That she had gone away in the night and never came back? Didn't think that was strange. Who, me? No, I didn't think nothing about it. I just go weed my onions. Charles then states, it is enough to drive a body to distraction. So between William's feeble story and apparent disinterest of his fate, Charles figured the old weirdo did it. William refused to cooperate with any effort to save him. He refused to be visited by a minister. He was unrepentant, uncommunicative, and Charles and others associated with the case became convinced that the correct result was reached and that William was in fact guilty. The old man was hanged at Rock Island, Illinois in March of 1882, before a group consisting largely of reporters. His last words were, "Gentlemen, I am innocent of this crime." Now Charles stated that none of those that heard him believed him. What guilty man is ever punished? What murderer, however hardened, however certain of his crime, fails to protest on the gallows in the like terms and with the same hardihood? All the experienced reporters there told me they had heard such assertions often on the like occasion and were not moved a whit. So they're all going with William having done it. Everybody's convinced that he is the man who did it. And 10 years pass. Then, in April of 1886, in a lodging house in Quincy, Illinois, another man, a wretched, tortured soul, sat and wrote a long and detailed confession to the crime for which William Hellwegner had been hanged. A confession to the murder of Dora Hellwegner. The note left behind, a suicide note, confessed to the murder of Dora, his wife. That's right. Otto confessed to having killed his wife. He wrote that he secretly rode back to the house in the dead of the night, enticed his wife out of the house, and murdered her for her infidelity. He left the note in his room, then he took himself to a nearby bridge, threw himself into the water, and drowned. The Hellwegners, father and son, kept their peace about the secret while William hanged. The old man sacrificed himself to save his son. Needless to say, Charles and many other people are horrified by the twist in the tale. He heaped blame upon himself for the execution of an innocent man, stating, "If I had been an expert in my trade, I might have saved that man. It was a rugged introduction for a novice to the business of crime detecting and legalized life-taking. If I had been an expert at my trade, I might have saved that man. Oh, how foolish it is. I can see now the indications and signs and hints that meant nothing to me then." "Who, me?" the old man had said in answer to my questions. "He knew it all. He knew who had killed Dora, and he went calmly to his death to save his guilty son." Dull old man, chill and repulsive, he had in him so much of the hero and so much of the love. For greater love hath no man than this. But all the reporter could elicit from the condemned man was, "I just go weed my onions." So, weird, interesting twist. I had a bit of a hard time finding what I thought was an interesting story about the state of Iowa, especially one that went far back and had enough detail. And this one by far is sparse on detail. However, I thought it was an interesting twist that this man would go to the gallows for his son, even while protesting his innocence. So, totally odd story, right? Couple interesting side notes about Charles. Charles became strictly anti-death penalty following William's case. He absolutely despised the idea that one person could take another person's life simply because of the crimes they were accused of committing. And this case justified that thought process for him. Charles was among 63 people who created the NAACP and served on the board of directors for the rest of his life. He was the son of a strict abolitionist, and he absolutely despised slavery. Another little quirk is that Charles was a member of the Socialist Party of America. Yes, the Socialist Party of America. However, he would ultimately be expelled from said party in 1917 for supporting the American intervention in the First World War. So I have so many questions about this story. One of the things that came to mind first was that their last name is spelled a number of different ways. I am sure that is because of when they immigrated, their name was changed to be more Americanized. Why is Dora often referred to as Annie in one of the records? Why can I not find pictures of them? Like, this was the late 1800s or the mid 1800s. You would have thought that if the newspaper was going to report on it, there would be a picture. And there were newspaper reports about the murder, the trial, the children coming to visit. And I did put a couple of pictures of those reports here on the end of the video. But do you know, I'm super confused about the story. I would love to have more information on that. So this is the newspaper article about the children coming to visit. It just talks about how she brought her 5 younger children. So I'm guessing that's why I think there might have been that 6th child. This is just a short mention of Otto's death. So yeah, I don't know. Thank you so much for stopping by for this episode of Crime and Coloring. I have added a couple of other videos here for you to watch, as well as a subscribe button. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up, and have a really great day.